For as long as I can remember, I have always been the one who takes care of others. Whether it was raising my children or supporting my husband, my life has revolved around the needs of my family. And when my grandchild came into the picture, I didn't hesitate for a second to step in and help. I loved him deeply, and I wanted to be there for him in every way possible. It started out as a small request. My daughter and her husband were both busy with work and life's demands, and they asked if I could look after their son for a while. A few months, they said. I didn't hesitate. After all, I had raised my own children, and I loved spending time with my grandchild. It felt like the natural thing to do. What I didn't realize at the time was that what began as a few months would turn into a full year of my life devoted to caring for him. Every day was filled with routines. I woke up early, made breakfast, helped him with schoolwork, played with him, fed him dinner, and tucked him into bed. I took him to his extracurricular activities, helped him with his hobbies, and made sure he always felt safe and loved. It was exhausting, but it was also fulfilling. Every time I saw his smiling face, every time he hugged me and said, "I love you, Grandma," it made all the sacrifices worth it. But as the months wore on, I began to notice something. Despite all my care, despite the endless hours I spent tending to his needs, no one seemed to notice. No one seemed to appreciate what I was doing. My daughter and son-in-law were grateful, of course, but it was more of a passing gratitude, something said out of obligation rather than genuine appreciation. And my grandchild, the one I was doing all this for, seemed to take it all for granted. The longer I cared for him, the more I started to feel like I was invisible. I was constantly putting my own needs aside, focusing all my energy on his well-being, and yet I felt as though my efforts were going unnoticed. It wasn't about wanting recognition, it was about feeling valued, about feeling like I mattered, not just as the person who took care of everything, but as a person in my own right. As the year went on, I started to feel the weight of the sacrifice. I missed time for myself, time to pursue my own hobbies, time to relax and enjoy life. But I didn't complain. I didn't say anything. This was my role, my responsibility, and I accepted it. After all, what's a grandmother for, if not to take care of her grandchildren? But then, the unthinkable happened. The one thing I had never expected, the one thing that would reveal just how invisible I had become. It was my birthday, a day that was supposed to be special, a day when I could feel appreciated, loved, and cared for. But as the day came and went, I realized that no one remembered. Not my daughter, not my grandchild, not anyone. I quietly watched as everyone went about their day as though it were just any other day. No phone calls, no cards, no gifts, nothing. I told myself it was no big deal. Birthdays come and go after all. But deep down, a part of me hurt. I had given a year of my life to caring for my grandchild, and yet not a single person took a moment to recognize me. Not even my own grandchild. It was a quiet hurt. A hurt I didn't speak about, because who would understand? I had given everything for this family. But in that moment, it felt like they had forgotten me entirely. And in that silence, I began to ask myself, was I just a caretaker, someone who existed only to serve others, to be taken for granted? This was the moment that changed everything for me. The moment when I realized that no matter how much I loved my family, no matter how much I gave, there was a need inside me that had never been fulfilled. I needed to be seen, to be valued, to be appreciated, not just for what I could do for others, but for who I was. That was when I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself, my time, my energy, without ever being acknowledged. I couldn't keep living my life for everyone else and neglecting myself in the process. The love I had for my family was real, but I also realized that I had to start loving myself. And it was time to take the first step toward doing that, even if it meant making some tough decisions. The year of caregiving had been a labor of love, but it had also opened my eyes to something important. I mattered, too. And I wasn't going to let anyone forget that again. The villa had always been more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of everything we had worked for, everything we had built as a family. It was where we celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. The walls of that house had witnessed countless memories, My children playing in the garden, my grandchildren running through the halls, and laughter filling every room. It was a home, yes, but it was also a legacy, a place where love and family were meant to be honored. When my husband was alive, the villa was a place of comfort, a refuge. It was the center of our lives, the place where I had nurtured my children, where we had spent so many years together. It was where we came together as a family to share both joyous and difficult moments. And after his passing, the villa became my anchor, my reason for carrying on, for keeping the family traditions alive. The house was always filled with the warmth of family, and I made sure of it. But over the years, the meaning of the villa had shifted. It no longer felt like the home I once cherished. As the years went by, it became a reminder of what I had sacrificed, of everything I had given up without ever asking for anything in return. It became a place where I felt more and more invisible, where my efforts were often taken for granted. When I began to care for my grandchild, the villa was where we spent most of our time. It became the place where I poured my heart into making sure he was happy, healthy, and loved. But as much as I loved him, something about the villa began to feel suffocating. It was no longer just a home. It was a reminder of my endless giving. It was where I had lost pieces of myself, where I had become the person who existed solely to care for others. The villa was a beautiful house, and it meant a lot to my family. But I began to see it as a symbol of all the things I had neglected. Every room seemed to echo with memories of my sacrifices, but it was a silence I could no longer ignore. I realized that despite everything I had done for the family, I was still being overlooked, still not seen for the person I was outside of my role as the caretaker. The day my grandchild forgot my birthday was the turning point. It wasn't just that one incident. It was everything that led up to it. The realization that I had been invisible for so long, that my efforts had been taken for granted, hit me like a ton of bricks. And the villa, once a place of love and joy, now felt like a weight around my neck. I had given so much to everyone else, my children, my husband, my grandchildren, but where was the recognition? Where was the acknowledgement of my efforts, of the love I had poured into this family? The villa, which had once been the heart of our home, was now a reminder of everything I had sacrificed without ever receiving anything in return. It felt like a reflection of the life I had lived, full of giving, but empty of anything for myself. And that's when I knew I had to make a change. I had spent years building a life for my family, putting their needs first, but it had come at the cost of my own happiness, my own sense of self. The villa, a symbol of our family's love, had become a symbol of my sacrifices, and I was tired of sacrificing myself. It wasn't just about selling a house. It was about taking control of my life, about putting myself first for once. The villa no longer held the same meaning for me, and I knew that I needed to let go, to move forward, to reclaim my sense of self-worth. I didn't make the decision lightly. The villa had been a part of my family for so long, and I knew how much it meant to everyone. But I had to ask myself, what is the price of love, of family? Was I willing to keep giving of myself, to keep living in the shadows of my family's expectations, without ever taking a moment to honor my own needs? The answer was no. I wasn't willing to keep living that way. So, I made the decision to sell the villa. It was my way of saying goodbye to the old version of myself, the version that gave everything without asking for anything in return. It was my way of taking control, of taking back my power and my happiness. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew it would cause a stir in the family, but I also knew it was something I had to do for myself. I couldn't keep living for others. I had to live for me. Once the decision to sell the villa was made, everything began to feel different. It wasn't just a change in my living situation, it was a shift in how I viewed my life, my worth, and my place in the family. I had spent so many years living for everyone else, always doing what was expected of me, always sacrificing my own desires for the sake of others. But in that moment, I realized that I had been neglecting the most important person in my life, myself. I didn't make this decision out of spite. I didn't do it to hurt anyone. It wasn't about punishing my family for taking me for granted. It was about setting boundaries. It was about taking back my life. The villa had been a constant reminder of everything I had given, But now it would be a reminder of how I had learned to prioritize myself, to say no, and to create space for my own needs and desires. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders as I thought about the life I wanted to build for myself, one where I wasn't just a caregiver, a fixer, or someone who gave endlessly without ever taking time for my own well-being. I had spent too much of my life trying to meet everyone else's expectations, and in doing so, I had lost sight of what I needed to feel happy, fulfilled, and valued. It wasn't about the money I would get from selling the villa. It was about the sense of empowerment, the sense of control that came with making that decision. For once, I wasn't just doing what everyone else wanted. I was doing something for me. I took my time, carefully considering all the details. I didn't rush the process. I reached out to a real estate agent and discussed the possibilities. I consulted with a lawyer to make sure everything was in order. But all the while, I felt a sense of peace, of confidence. For the first time in years, I was making a decision that was solely for my own happiness, my own growth. When I finally signed the papers, I felt a deep sense of release. It was as though I had closed a chapter of my life that had been holding me back. Selling the villa wasn't just about letting go of a physical space. It was about letting go of the old version of me, the version that lived in the shadow of everyone else's needs. It was about making room for a new version of me, one that understood the importance of self-care, self-respect, and self-love. The decision wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. My family's reactions were not as I had expected. Many were hurt, confused, and upset. They couldn't understand why I would sell the villa, the place that meant so much to them. To them, it was a symbol of family, of love, of our shared history. And I knew that selling it would upset the family dynamics. I could already hear the questions, the judgment, the hurtful comments. But I had to stand firm in my decision. I had to remind myself that I was not doing this to hurt anyone. I was doing it for me. I had spent a lifetime trying to make everyone happy, but at the expense of my own happiness. I had been so focused on being the caretaker, the one who always gave, that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. I had to change that. I had to set boundaries, even if it meant disappointing others. I had to learn that it was okay to say no, that it was okay to put myself first. And so I sold the villa. It was a painful decision, but it was the right one. It was the first step toward reclaiming my life. It was the first step in learning how to live for myself, not for the approval or acceptance of others. In the end, I knew this was more than just a property transaction. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter where I honored my own needs, where I stood up for myself, and where I took control of my own happiness. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I felt like I was taking control of my life, and that, in itself, was a victory. I was no longer just the person who gave everything and got nothing in return. I was someone who understood her own worth, who knew that self-love and self-care were not selfish, they were necessary. The villa was gone, but what I had gained was far more valuable. My sense of self, my independence, and the understanding that I deserved to live a life where I was seen, valued, and loved, not just by others, but by myself. When I finally told my family that I had sold the villa, the reactions were swift and intense. The family had always regarded the villa as a symbol of our togetherness, our shared memories. It wasn't just a house, it was a place where we had all come together to celebrate birthdays, holidays, and milestones. To sell it felt like tearing apart the fabric of our family's history. I understood why they were upset, but I also knew that I couldn't keep living in a space that had become a constant reminder of my self-sacrifice. My daughter was the first to react, and her anger was immediate. "How could you sell it, Mom? That's our home, our family's legacy," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. She didn't understand why I would make such a drastic decision. She thought it was a betrayal. After all, the villa had always been central to our family's gatherings, the place where we all felt safe and loved. To her, it wasn't just a home, it was the place where family memories were made. I watched her face, filled with hurt and confusion, and I felt guilty, I won't lie. I had spent so many years catering to the needs of my family, doing what was expected of me without question. And now here I was, making a decision for myself that they couldn't comprehend. In their eyes, I had become the villain. I had taken something from them without giving them a say in the matter. But my decision wasn't just about the villa. It was about me. It was about reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my sense of self. I tried to explain it to her, to make her understand that I had felt invisible, unappreciated for so long. I told her that the villa, once a place of joy and comfort, had become a symbol of everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, without ever asking for anything in return. It's not just about the house, I said, my voice trembling. It's about me finally realizing that I matter too, that I have to take care of myself, just as I've taken care of all of you. But my words didn't seem to reach her. She couldn't see past the loss of the villa, and I couldn't make her understand how much it meant for me to finally take control of my own life. The guilt weighed on me, and for a moment, I wondered if I had made the right decision. Could I have found another way to assert myself without causing this much hurt? And then there was my son-in-law, who was just as confused. "You didn't even consult us first," he said, his tone a mixture of frustration and hurt. "We all love that house, and now it's gone. Why didn't you talk to us?" It was clear that the family felt blindsided, and my decision to sell the villa had opened a wound that hadn't been there before. They saw it as an act of defiance, an abandonment of something that had been part of our family for generations. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't understand, was that I wasn't abandoning them. I wasn't rejecting them. I was finally choosing myself after years of living for everyone else. I could feel the emotional distance growing between us, and it hurt. I love my family. I didn't want to hurt them, but I also knew that I couldn't keep ignoring my own needs for their comfort. I couldn't keep pretending that I was fine, that I didn't have feelings, that I didn't deserve to be seen and heard. And then the hardest part came. My grandchild, who I had cared for so deeply, who I had raised for a year, had no idea why I had made this decision. He was too young to understand the complexities of my actions. All he knew was that the villa, the place where we had spent so many hours together, was gone. "Grandma," he asked me one evening, "why did we have to leave the villa? I liked it there." I couldn't answer him in a way that would make sense to him. How could I explain that I had sold the villa to reclaim my life, to set boundaries, to show that I was worthy of respect? He didn't understand, and part of me wondered if he ever would. As the days passed, I began to realize that the fallout wasn't just between me and my family, it was within me too. I had made this decision with all my heart, believing it was the right thing to do for myself, but the guilt and the fear of disappointing my family lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had hurt them. And yet, deep down, I knew this was something I had to do. I had to take control of my life, to stop living for others, and to start living for myself. I couldn't change the way they felt. I couldn't undo the pain I had caused. But I knew that this was the only way I could begin to heal, to reclaim my happiness, and to set the boundaries I so desperately needed. The villa was gone, but the real work had just begun. I had to rebuild not just my life, but my relationship with my family, and most importantly, with myself. And even though it was hard, even though the pain of their reaction still stung, I knew that I had made the right choice. It was the first step toward healing, the first step toward reclaiming who I was. And I was ready to take that step, even if it meant facing the fallout. The days after selling the villa were filled with a mixture of emotions: relief, guilt, uncertainty, and the haunting echoes of family disappointment. The world around me felt different, as though I had crossed an invisible line. I had made a decision for myself, a decision that, despite being the right one, came with consequences. And while my family was still reeling from the loss of the villa, something inside me shifted. I realized that I was no longer just going to be the person who gave endlessly without receiving anything in return. I was finally starting to take control of my life. This wasn't just about selling a house. It was about setting boundaries, something I had never done properly before. For years, I had lived for my family. I had put my needs aside, sacrificing my own happiness and desires to make sure everyone else was content. I thought that was what love and family were about, giving and giving without ever asking for anything in return. But in doing so, I had allowed myself to become invisible. I had given so much of myself, but I had forgotten to nurture my own heart. Selling the villa was my first step in learning how to set boundaries, to stand up for myself, and to finally say no when necessary. For the first time in my life, I was doing something that was solely for me. I wasn't living in the shadow of my family's expectations. I wasn't sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of their comfort. I was finally learning that it was okay to prioritize myself. The guilt that had plagued me for so long began to lessen. I realized that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary. It wasn't about pushing people away. It was about preserving my own mental and emotional health. It was about recognizing my own worth and making sure that I wasn't being taken for granted. For years, I had allowed my family to take up all of my energy, leaving nothing for myself. I had been afraid to speak up, afraid to ask for what I needed, and afraid to put my foot down when things were wrong. But no more. I realized that by allowing myself to be ignored, I was only hurting myself. By not setting boundaries, I was teaching others that it was okay to overlook my needs. It wasn't easy, though. When I first started to assert myself, it felt uncomfortable. I had spent so much time suppressing my feelings, trying to meet everyone else's needs, that standing up for myself felt foreign. It felt like I was being selfish. But as I practiced setting small boundaries, I began to realize that I wasn't being selfish at all. I was simply taking care of myself, just as I had always taken care of others. And in doing so, I was teaching my family an important lesson, one that I had learned the hard way. The lesson was simple: I matter too. My needs, my feelings, and my happiness are just as important as anyone else's. I'm not just a caretaker. I am a person with my own desires, goals, and dreams. And I deserve to live a life that reflects that. As I learned to say no, I also learned how to say yes to myself, yes to my happiness, yes to my own needs, yes to a life where I am not defined by what I give, but by who I am. And in doing so, I found a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. The hardest part was realizing that setting boundaries doesn't mean you love your family any less. It means you love yourself more. I didn't have to sacrifice my happiness for the sake of others. I could still love my family, still care for them, but I could do it from a place of strength and self-respect, rather than exhaustion and resentment. As time passed, I began to see changes in my family's reactions, too. Slowly, but surely, they started to understand why I had made the decision to sell the villa. At first, they were upset. They couldn't comprehend why I would make such a drastic move. But as I continued to set boundaries, as I continued to prioritize my own happiness, they began to see a different side of me. They began to see the woman I had always been, but had never been allowed to show. And with that came a renewed sense of respect, not just from them, but from myself. Setting boundaries wasn't just a lesson in self-care. It was a lesson in self-respect. I learned that I am worthy of love, of respect, and of care, not just from others, but from myself. I didn't have to keep giving everything I had until there was nothing left. I could give without depleting myself, and I could ask for what I needed, knowing that my needs were just as important as anyone else's. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but I was learning. I was learning how to live for myself, to take care of myself, and to stand up for my own happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with the decision I had made. I wasn't just living for my family anymore. I was living for me, and that made all the difference. After I made the decision to sell the villa, I thought the hardest part was over. But I soon realized that the real work was just beginning. As the days went by, I found myself reflecting more and more on the year I had spent caring for my grandchild. I had loved every moment of it, but it also made me confront the quiet sacrifices I had made along the way. I had given everything, my time, my energy, my heart, and in return, I was left feeling unnoticed. I spent a year caring for my grandchild as if he were my own child, but in the end, I felt like I had been invisible. And what hurt the most was that, despite all the love I had poured into him, he had forgotten something as simple and important as my birthday. The memory of that day still stung. It wasn't just the forgotten birthday. It was everything that led up to that moment. The sleepless nights, The long days, the sacrifices I had made, and yet nothing in return. The villa, which had once been a place full of joy and love, had become a symbol of everything I had given without ever asking for anything in return. But as I reflected, I began to see that the pain of that year was more than just about being forgotten. It was about a deeper realization, one that I had spent years avoiding. I had been so focused on taking care of others, on making sure everyone around me was happy, that I had lost sight of myself. I had forgotten that I, too, needed to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. I had spent so much of my life giving, thinking that was the only way to show my love. But now I understood that love doesn't always mean sacrifice. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes love means taking care of yourself, even when it feels uncomfortable or selfish. And sometimes love means walking away from situations that no longer serve you, even if they've been a part of your life for years. The truth was, I had been living in the shadow of everyone else's expectations for far too long. I had been the caretaker, the one who always put others first, always gave everything without asking for anything in return. But in doing that, I had forgotten the most important lesson of all. I matter too. This realization was both painful and freeing. It hurt to acknowledge that I had been living in a way that had depleted me, that had made me feel invisible. But at the same time, it was liberating to finally see that I had the power to change that. I didn't have to keep sacrificing my own happiness for others. I could choose to live for myself, to make decisions based on what was best for me, not just what was expected of me. As the days passed, I began to let go of the guilt. I realized that the decision to sell the villa wasn't about hurting anyone. It was about healing myself. I wasn't abandoning my family, and I wasn't rejecting them. I was simply choosing to reclaim my life. I was choosing to take care of myself for the first time in a long time, and that wasn't something to feel guilty about. It was something to celebrate. But even as I began to let go of the guilt, I couldn't help but feel the sadness of it all. The villa was more than just a building. It was the place where my children and grandchildren had made memories, the place where we had all come together as a family. And now it was gone. And with it, I had to let go of the idea of who I thought I was. I had always seen myself as the matriarch of the family, the one who held everything together, the one who sacrificed everything for the sake of others. But as I let go of the villa, I realized that my identity wasn't tied to that role anymore. I wasn't just a caretaker. I wasn't just a mother or a grandmother. I was a person in my own right, with my own needs, desires, and dreams. Letting go of the villa was an emotional journey. It wasn't just about selling a house. It was about letting go of a version of myself that I had outgrown. It was about embracing a new chapter, one where I would no longer be defined by what I gave, but by who I was. As I reflected on the year I had spent caring for my grandchild, I realized that the love I had given him was real. It was deep and it was pure. But I also realized that in giving so much of myself, I had neglected my own needs. I had given without asking for anything in return, and in doing so, I had forgotten that I, too, deserved to be cared for. Now, I understood that it wasn't enough to just give. I had to learn how to receive, how to take care of myself, and how to set boundaries that protected my happiness. I had spent so long putting everyone else first that I had lost sight of what it meant to truly love and care for myself. The journey wasn't over. I still had a lot to learn, and I knew that healing would take time. But I also knew that I was on the right path. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my sense of self-worth. And with that, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The villa was gone, but I had found something much more valuable, myself. Looking back at everything that had unfolded, I realized that this journey wasn't just about selling a villa or facing the fallout with my family. It was about something much deeper. The lessons I had learned along the way, the growth that had come from difficult choices, and the transformation that had taken place in me. The most important lesson I learned throughout this experience was the power of setting boundaries. For years, I had been the one who always gave, always put others before myself. I thought that's what love meant. that I had to be selfless, that my happiness was secondary to everyone else's. I had been the pillar for my family, always there to care for them, to support them, to hold everything together. But in doing so, I had neglected myself. I had lost sight of my own needs, my own happiness, and my own voice. Setting boundaries wasn't something I had ever really understood before. The idea of saying no felt foreign to me. I had always been the one to say yes, to do what was expected, to put my family's needs ahead of my own. But I realized that by doing that, I was not only hurting myself, I was teaching my family that my needs didn't matter. I was allowing myself to be overlooked, to be invisible, and that wasn't fair to me. When I sold the villa, it wasn't just a house I was letting go of. It was a symbol of everything I had given without ever asking for anything in return. It was the turning point where I realized that it was time for me to start taking care of myself. I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my family's expectations. I had to put myself first, to make decisions based on what was best for me, not just what others wanted. Another lesson I learned was the importance of self-worth. For so long, I had defined myself by what I could give to others. I thought that my value came from being the caretaker, the one who made everyone else's life easier. But in doing that, I had forgotten that I, too, had value. I deserved to be seen, to be appreciated, and to be loved, not just for what I did for others, but for who I was. By setting boundaries and prioritizing my own needs, I began to understand my own worth. I no longer needed validation from anyone else. I didn't need my family's approval to feel worthy. I had spent so many years seeking approval, thinking that if I just gave enough, I would be loved in return. But I learned that love doesn't come from what we do for others. It comes from who we are. And once I started valuing myself, I realized that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Letting go was another vital lesson I had to learn. The villa was a representation of everything I had sacrificed for my family, everything I had given up without ever asking for anything in return. And while it was painful to sell it, I realized that it wasn't about the house. It was about letting go of the old version of myself, the one who had been defined by her role as the caretaker. I needed to free myself from that identity and embrace a new one where I was not just a caregiver, but a person with my own dreams, my own desires, and my own voice. Letting go wasn't just about the villa. It was about letting go of the guilt, the expectations, and the fear that had held me back for so long. I had been afraid to disappoint my family, afraid to say no, afraid to put myself first. But I realized that by holding on to those fears, I was only keeping myself stuck. It was time to release the old patterns and step into a new way of living, one where I could create a life that truly honored who I was. Perhaps the hardest lesson of all was learning that it's okay to disappoint others. I spent so many years trying to please everyone, trying to meet everyone's expectations, that I lost myself in the process. I was afraid of disappointing my family, of upsetting them, of feeling guilty for not always being the one to give. But I came to understand that I didn't have to live my life in constant sacrifice. By choosing myself, I was not abandoning my family. I was simply taking care of myself. I was teaching them an important lesson about self-respect, about the importance of boundaries, and about the need to love and care for ourselves before we can love and care for others. And so, I learned that it was okay to say no without feeling guilty. It was okay to take a step back and focus on my own needs. It was okay to be human, to have flaws, to make mistakes, and to prioritize my own happiness. In fact, it was necessary. The journey wasn't easy. It wasn't without its challenges, and there were still moments of doubt. But the more I practiced setting boundaries, the more I realized that the best way I could love my family was by loving myself first. The more I honored my own needs, the better I could be for them. And as time went on, I began to feel a sense of peace, a sense of confidence that I had never known before. I didn't need the villa to feel valued. I didn't need to sacrifice my happiness for the sake of others. What I needed was to love myself, to respect myself, and to honor my own life. And once I understood that, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about selling a house. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about taking the power back, taking control of my future, and learning that I am worthy of love, respect, and care, not just from others, but from myself. And that, more than anything, was the greatest lesson I could have ever learned. As time passed, I began to understand that healing isn't something that happens overnight. It's a slow process, one that requires patience, self-reflection, and the willingness to make difficult choices, even when it hurts. My decision to sell the villa and take control of my life had rocked my family, but it had also opened the door to deeper conversations, moments of vulnerability, and the beginning of real understanding. The first step in rebuilding my relationships with my family was acknowledging the pain that my actions had caused. I knew that I had hurt them, even if my intentions had been the opposite. I didn't want to break anyone's heart, but I also understood that in order to rebuild myself, I had to make decisions that were right for me, even if they were difficult for others to accept. One evening, as I sat across from my daughter, I saw the hurt in her eyes. She had always been my closest confidant, but now there was a distance between us that had never been there before. The villa had been so much more than just a property. It was a part of our shared family history, a place where my daughter had spent her childhood and where my grandchildren had made their own memories. It wasn't just the loss of the house, it was the feeling of losing a part of their family's foundation. But I knew I had to face the consequences of my choices, and in doing so, I also had to give space for healing. I know this isn't easy, I said, my voice soft but steady. And I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I want you to understand that I did what I did because I needed to take care of myself. I needed to find myself again. I couldn't keep losing who I was for the sake of everyone else. She didn't say anything at first, and for a while we both sat in silence. But then, slowly, she spoke. I get it. I get why you did it. I just didn't understand how much you were hurting. I thought you were fine, that you were okay. But I see now that you were sacrificing more than I realized. In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my chest. She hadn't completely understood my decision before. But now, she was beginning to see the bigger picture. She understood that I hadn't sold the villa out of malice or spite. It had been a necessary step in reclaiming my life, in finding my voice. And that understanding opened the door for us to begin healing. We didn't have all the answers, and there were still difficult conversations ahead, but we had started a new chapter in our relationship, one built on mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The next step in rebuilding our family dynamic was creating space for open communication. I realized that my family didn't understand my decision because we hadn't had those hard conversations before. I had always been the one who kept the peace, who silently carried the weight of everything. But now, I was learning to express my feelings, my desires, and my needs. And I wanted to encourage my family to do the same. I reached out to my son-in-law, too, who had also been hurt by my decision. We sat down together and had a long conversation, one that was uncomfortable at times, but ultimately necessary. I know you're upset, I told him, but I want you to understand that this wasn't about the villa. It was about me finding my own strength, my own sense of self-worth. His response wasn't immediate, but over time, I could see that he began to understand. It wasn't an easy pill to swallow, but he began to respect my decision, even if he didn't fully agree with it. As the weeks turned into months, the distance between my family and me started to shrink. We weren't the same as we had been before, and our relationships would never go back to how they were. But in a way, that was okay. Sometimes, things need to change in order to grow. We all had to adapt to this new reality, this new version of ourselves. And as I continued to rebuild, I began to see how much my decision had actually empowered them, too. I had been afraid that my family would see me as selfish or as abandoning them, but instead, they began to see that setting boundaries and taking control of your life was something worth respecting. My actions had shown them that it was okay to take care of yourself, to prioritize your own happiness, and that doing so didn't mean you loved others any less. Even my grandchild, who had been confused and upset at first, began to see the change in me. He began to understand that Grandma wasn't just someone who took care of him. She was a person with her own dreams, her own desires. We started to have deeper conversations about what it means to respect others and to value ourselves. As time passed, our family found a new rhythm. We learned how to communicate better, how to listen without judgment, and how to give each other space to grow. There was still healing to be done, still moments of tension and misunderstanding, but we were all more open now, more willing to listen, more willing to understand. And through all of this, I realized that my journey wasn't just about reclaiming my life. It was about teaching my family how to reclaim theirs, too. I had to set the example, had to show them that it was okay to prioritize our own happiness, to set boundaries, and to love ourselves. Because in the end, that's what truly allows us to love others in the best way possible. Rebuilding the relationships wasn't easy. It took time, it took effort, and it took a lot of heart-to-heart conversations. But in the end, it was worth it. We weren't the same, but we were stronger, more connected, and more understanding of each other's needs. And as I looked at my family, I realized that through my decision to reclaim my life, we had all grown closer in ways that I never could have imagined before. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was filled with love, respect, and the understanding that we are all worthy of taking care of ourselves, no matter how difficult it may seem. It was the beginning of a family that could live, love, and grow together, not at the cost of each other's happiness, but alongside it. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I realize that my journey hasn't just been about letting go of a physical space. It's been about letting go of the old version of myself, the one who was defined by sacrifice, by putting others before myself, and by silently carrying the weight of everyone's needs. It's been about understanding that in order to truly love others, I had to first learn to love and respect myself. The decision to sell the villa was the catalyst for this transformation. It was the moment I finally broke free from the role I had played for so long. The role of the invisible caregiver, the one who gave everything without asking for anything in return. Letting go of the villa wasn't just about freeing myself from a house. It was about reclaiming my own identity, my own voice, and my own happiness. The fallout with my family was painful, yes. It wasn't easy to be misunderstood, to have my intentions questioned, and to face the disappointment of those I loved. But in the end, I learned that I couldn't live my life based on others' expectations, especially when those expectations caused me to lose myself in the process. I had to make a choice to live for me, to take back my power, and to show my family that it was okay to prioritize self-care and set boundaries. The road wasn't easy. It wasn't all smooth sailing, and there were still moments of doubt, guilt, and fear. But as I learned to set boundaries, to say no without feeling guilty, and to put my own happiness first, I began to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't known in years. I had done something for myself, and that was the first step toward healing, both for me and for my family. My relationship with my daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild began to evolve. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We started having conversations that were more honest, more open. They began to understand that my decision to sell the villa wasn't about abandoning them. It was about me finding my way back to who I was. It was about showing them that I, too, deserved respect and care, just like anyone else in the family. The villa was no longer the symbol of our family's love and unity, but I realized that love and unity didn't have to come from a house. Love came from the respect, understanding, and care we showed each other. It came from the space we created to grow, to heal, and to support one another. As I embraced my new life, I found that the things I had once feared, disappointing my family, losing their approval, were not as important as I had made them out to be. What mattered more was that I had found the strength to stand up for myself, to assert my worth, and to finally live for me. And in doing so, I was able to show my family that the most powerful form of love is self-love. When we love ourselves, we become better able to love and support others, not out of obligation, but from a place of strength and mutual respect. Moving forward, I no longer feel like the caretaker who lives in the background. I no longer feel invisible. I feel empowered. I feel seen. And I know now that it's never too late to change, to make decisions that honor who you are, and to create the life you want. This journey has taught me that it's okay to let go. It's okay to make tough decisions. It's okay to disappoint others if it means taking care of yourself. It's okay to prioritize your own happiness. And it's okay to put yourself first. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I am ready for it. I am ready to live the life I deserve, to continue healing, and to embrace the woman I've become. No longer defined by my role as a caretaker, I am now defined by my strength, my resilience, and my ability to love and care for myself. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If you've ever felt invisible, unnoticed, or unappreciated, I want you to know that you are not alone. You are worthy of love, respect, and happiness. You have the power to set boundaries, to reclaim your life, and to live for yourself. It's never too late to take that first step. The road to self-discovery, empowerment, and peace is long, but it is always worth it. Keep moving forward and remember, you are enough. You always have been.